Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Nova Robinson, and I direct the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program here at Seattle University. I'm a historian, and I also teach in the International Studies program, and I showcase all of those different identities that I share in order to emphasize that the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program is one that dovetails very nicely with a lot of different majors on campus. So if you are interested in a WGSS major or minor, please come talk to me. We are always looking for including new voices and perspectives in our curriculum. Today, it is my distinct pleasure to be introducing our first event in our series this year. Our series each year is one that we select in order to showcase the intersectionality and the interdisciplinarity of the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program. And this year, our series is Gendering Politics, and it is an opportunity for us to explore the ways in which gender shapes politics and politics shapes gender. And this is the first in a year-long series. There'll be other events in the spring quarter, so please keep abreast of your emails to learn about those events. Today's event is Feminisms and Politics, the place of feminism in a new political landscape, and it is the brainchild of Professor Gutiérrez y Muhs, who will be introducing the other speakers in just a few moments. But before I introduce everybody on the stage, or they are introduced, just wanted to offer a few words about Professor Gutiérrez y Muhs' illustrious academic past, and also to bring your attention to her wide-ranging publications, including the hot off the press children's book, Ivan. It is a book that chronicles the adventures of a young boy's journey to the United States and back to Mexico. And it is crucial for us to always be thinking about educating a wide variety of audiences, even though many of us are targeting college students in much of what we do and what we teach. Professor Gabriella Gutiérrez y Muhs is a full professor in modern languages and cultures and the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program. She currently teaches a wide variety of courses for the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program, and many of them focus on Latinx literature. And for those of you who are looking for classes for the spring quarter and for next fall, she's offering wonderful courses on Latinx literature that you should think about enrolling in. She has served as the Piggott-McCone Chair at Seattle University and was a commissioner in the Washington State Arts Commission, both very high-profile positions that brought attention to her scholarship. And she has published widely as a poet. In addition, she has been granted a lot of recognition for a collection that she put together, Presumed Incompetent, The Intersections of Race and Class for Women in Academia. And that came out in 2012, but has been republished twice, I believe. The sign that it is truly an important academic work. When academic works go into republishing, you know it's a big deal. So without further ado, I'll pass things over to Professor Gutiérrez y Muhs, who will introduce the other speakers. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend today.
Thank you so much, Nova. I'm so grateful to have this event happen. I have been wanting to have it every year because, as you know, we all have to update our discipline. In the last few days, we lost one of our colleagues in theology. And she was a feminist. And I think it's important. I wanted to do this in honor of her. Leticia Guardiola Sainz. I would like to thank our leader and director of Women and Gender Studies, Nova Robinson. You just saw how cheerful she is and hardworking, for supporting me on this endeavor. Heidi Speck for the fabulous poster and program you have in your hands. The IT people, always generous. Conference and Event Services, the Arts and Sciences Events Committee, who kindly contributed to this event, our Dean, Monica Casper, who unfortunately at the last minute had an emergency and could not be here, but she also wanted to welcome you. And I would especially like to applaud for my students who are here. Raise your hand if you're my student or my former student. Yes? Thank you. The person giving you the programs or handing out the evaluations, Noemi, she was my student about 15 years ago. So they do follow us. We have a marvelous conversation lined up for you with the people I selected among many to join us today. I have to say that this is a first event and that I hope it is the first of many. I've already identified some professors in the audience that will be our second, our second batch of feminists and people who know the history here at Seattle University. And I commit to doing that in the future and growing this. Please bring your friends next time as well. I'll begin my introduction to this event with a poem about my sense of feminisms, knowing that we need to pay attention that that's not a singular, but a plural. Mujerista. I trade a credit card for love no more. I know we offer freedom of dress to all women and interrupt those who interrupt freedom and respect. We respect women who hold us up and wipe clean the blackboard of insults that hopped over at some point. They hopped over at some point. We love women, all women, trans women who sing our allyship, our ship on the waters of progress, our ship on the construction of docks of forgiveness and tolerance. We hail. We feministas carry all women on our backs and our family men with us, our children, comrades, classmates, primos, the guys with a virgin tattooed on their legs, or backs of heads or chests, all of them. Today, there are many ways of being a feminist, and we are particularly excited about presenting some forms of feminisms to you. Not all forms, just some forms. The plural on the title of this event is not gratuitous. We bring to you the past, the present, and offer some possibilities for the future with this timely event. We should be celebrating the upcoming presidency of a woman today, but instead we're preparing with our feminisms for the near future. Resilience, information, and a plan for the future within our political frameworks. When I was a young woman, feminism in mainstream America was measured by how you presented, how you dressed. I remember walking into my first community college class where I was a professor and having feminist students comment on the fact that I could not in fact be the professor since I was wearing pink heels and pink lipstick. We have evolved since then, and you hopefully do not judge people in their appearance in deciding whether or not they subscribe to a feminist lifestyle. For some of us, being a feminist is in everything we do, drink, eat, and how we relate to others. I know we all have a question we ponder upon in regards to feminism. Why does the media spend all its time talking about the Kardashians and not about the Cholita climbers, skaters, wrestlers in Bolivia? Why do we often dismiss community organizers in the global South as non-feminists, as if we owned feminisms? Did you know that we as Americans have benefited from feminisms from all cultures? For example, did you know that the phrase, the pursuit of happiness, so deeply ingrained in each of us, comes from the Iroquois, an indigenous nation? Feminism is about equity and equality, about giving everyone a platform to express themselves, about not being afraid to talk. Yet, we often take away speech from people who are not exactly like us. Some of the best feminist voices that have come from the United States are voices of women of color, and they have given us the tools to speak up. And you can see there's some quotes back here. We'll move it up a little bit later, and this is intended for you to reflect on some of these quotes and how you feel about them. Also, please look at the papers that Noemi gave you and make sure that you leave the evaluation, and the other paper is for you to think about what feminism is to you. In the first part, I intended to have a front, back, half a sheet, but things don't always work the way we wanted them to. So I'd like for you to do a pre and post type of thing. What do you think feminism is? Just for you, where nobody else is going to see it. And I'm almost done here because we have so many wonderful things. These are some of the people I most treasure and admire as feminists. And they have so much to say to you. I'm going to ask you, Deycha, to go over there because this is closer to introduce everybody. I have asked the speakers today for each of them to give us a snapshot of their feminisms. We will attempt to look at how each one of them arrived to their forms of feminism. And I asked them to speak about how they have seen feminisms evolve in the last 20 years of their lives, especially lately. I have also asked them about the expectations for the future in the feminist arena, and particularly in politics and political and social organizations by women. For example, now, the National Organization for Women, MADRE, International Human Rights Campaign, and many, many, many others. In the United States, we will not install a woman president this Monday. Yet south of us in Mexico, we have a phenomenal woman, Mexican Jewish, Claudia Sheinbaum, in a country that we speak about as patriarchal. This woman is crisscrossing the Mexican nation, speaking to Native peoples throughout the country and ratifying their rights as contemporary Mexican equals to other Mexicans because it had not been done before. And that is what feminists do. They do what has not been done for the rights, for equity, for equality of people. Feminism is not only about women taking up political space, but how they use their politics. Because a woman can still uphold a fascist regime. I'm not commenting here on Claudia, but rather on other women political leaders around the world. Intersectional feminism should be able to hold the leaders of nation states accountable, and we should be able to imagine beyond the nation state and identify some of the things that we don't normally see as feminist actions. The notion of healing as a community is also Native and American. And when I say American, my students know this. America from all the Americas, from the entire hemisphere. From the Americas, from our indigenous ancestors who paid special attention to healing themselves and others. So healing is very much a feminist notion. Who are you healing? I'm now going to introduce the speakers as they are in the program. I think I've known Dr. Nalini Iyer for 25 years since I arrived here. I'm so proud of her work as a feminist at our university every day, in academic assembly and so many other things to make sure that things are equitable here. Nalini Iyer is a professor of English here. She teaches courses in post-colonial South Asian and African writing, diaspora studies, and transnational feminisms. Her books include Other Tongues, Rethinking the Language Debates in India, Roots and Reflections, South Asians in the Pacific Northwest, Revisiting India's Partition, New Essays on Memory, Culture, and Politics, 2016, and Teaching Anglophone South Asian Diasporic Literature, 2024. It's really hard to select, Nalini, and to keep going. Very accomplished. I think what I'll do is I'm going to introduce each of you so that I don't have to come up every time. Let me see. I'll just go in order of the program. Kari Lerum right here, also met her 25 years ago. And she's a professor of sociology at the University of Washington, and in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences in Bothell, and an adjunct professor in gender, women, and sexuality studies in University of Washington, Seattle. Dr. Lerum's primary research focuses on the intersections of sexuality, power, and context, with a focus on sex work and the politics of anti-human trafficking policies. Her current research includes a community-based interview project with trans and non-binary individuals in the sex trade in the Seattle area. Welcome to SU, your previous home. Thank you. And then we have a social work professor right here, Hye-Kyung Kang. So many degrees, master's, MSW, PhD, and is a professor of social work at Seattle University. Founded a social justice focused and community-based clinical master of social work program in 2015. So thanks to her, we have this program. And established a social work department with a social justice mission in 2018. She is a first-generation immigrant, Korean-American, social worker, and received her MSW and PhD from the University of Washington School of Social Work. And I only hear amazing things about you from the students, so that's why I wanted you here. And then we have Deycha Robinson. Deycha is a graduate of the University of Michigan and a self-taught visual artist who specializes in painting using acrylic wash and digital media. She's currently pursuing a master's in teaching. She works as a freelance teaching artist, cultivating young folks' imaginations as a tool for radical self-actualization. She's a Black, queer, gender-expansive femme artist, raised in community with Black folk in Southeast Washington, D.C. She brings to us a rich history of innovation and resilience despite systemic oppression. She spent the last decade in Seattle developing her artistry and discovering her love of teaching liberation through art. Deycha is an amazing, what we call artivista, an art activist. And she knows everybody. I've gone to art where people are selling their art. She's well known in Seattle, very important activist in the LGBT community. Thank you. I'm going to ask each of you, as you know, to come up and give us your 5-minute presentation. A little bit longer if you have to. And then we're going to come back to the group and have a conversation about these issues. And then we're going to get some questions, hopefully, from everybody out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies for organizing this, to Dr. Gabriella Gutiérrez y Muhs for inviting me. I really appreciate being here, and to the audience here, thank you for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces. So Gabriella asked us as speakers to reflect on what feminisms, in the plural, means to us, and to speak to our personal and intellectual journeys as feminists, and then to asked us to relate all that to where we are politically right now. So I was born and raised in India and came to the United States for graduate school. While I've spent the majority of my time in the US and lived the longest here in the Pacific Northwest, my different experiences in India and in the United States have shaped my sense of feminism. After all, we feminists know the personal is political, so I'm going to tell you the story of my life. My very first feminist memory, I didn't call myself a feminist until I was in graduate school. But my very first feminist resistant moment, if you will, comes from when I was 6 years old. Hindu Brahmin families like mine perform a sacred thread ceremony for their sons as an initiation into their spiritual rights and responsibilities. There is no such ceremony for daughters, and the men, fathers and husbands primarily, are expected to shape the spiritual lives of women. My 6-year-old self was totally indignant that my brother was at the center of this big ceremony and was receiving gifts. I pitched a tantrum and demanded to be included. I was told that girls didn't have a place in these rituals. My cousin, who was then a 20-year-old college student, tried to calm me down, and she took me away to the side, wiped my tears, and said, "Who wants to do all this nonsense with these boys? We girls have a lot of fun because we do a lot of things together. We sisters stick together." This was my first lesson in both patriarchal privilege and the world of sisterly solidarity. And yes, my female cousins and I have stuck together in sisterly solidarity since then. Fast forward to my college years, I was an English major who loved what she experienced in the classroom, but had no idea what her future held because the family practice was for daughters to have an arranged marriage once they graduated college. While I was bemoaning to my brother, yes, the very same sibling who had patriarchal privileges, that I was going to end up at the wrong end of a spatula in someone's kitchen, I am prone to dramatic statements, he suggested to me that I should also come to the United States for grad school. This was a mind-blowing suggestion. No woman in my maternal family line, where all the sisterly solidarity came from, had ever considered an education and a career after college. My brother and later his wife, who were themselves grad students in the United States, supported and mentored me as I applied for graduate school. So my experience of feminism also involved a feminist brother and parents who valued and supported my dreams enough to push back against familial and societal pressure and let me pursue an academic life. It was in graduate school that I encountered the term feminism in its seriousness in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And it was primarily as an academic feminist, right? So reading Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own and scholarly works by Elaine Showalter, Sandra Gilbert, and Susan Gobar, books like Mad Woman in the Attic, made me recognize how minimally women writers had been part of my education. Women faculty at Purdue, where I got my PhD, worked very hard. There were a handful of women faculty, and they worked very hard to include women writers in the English graduate curriculum. And I learned to read with a feminist critical lens and to seek out overlooked women writers for my own edification. Still, there was something missing for me, and as I was trying to articulate what that was, I read Gayatri Spivak's key essays, Three Women's Texts, and the other one, Can the Subaltern Speak? At the same time, Chandra Mohanty had published her work Under Western Eyes, and I read Black feminists like Alice Walker and Bell Hooks, and Chicana women like Gloria Anzaldúa. These thinkers opened my eyes to imperial feminism, to transnational feminisms, and to the plurality of feminist experiences. Early in my career here at SU, I encountered intersectionality as a term through the work of Kimberly Crenshaw, and it shaped my thinking as a woman of color. Keep in mind, the idea of being a woman of color itself was part of the migrant experience. I wasn't a woman of color growing up in India. I was just an ordinary girl. So what did it mean to be a woman of color feminist? Working with colleagues and students at SU meant that I was being constantly challenged to examine what my positionality was. And some of these folks are right here on the stage or in the audience. Yes, I'm a woman of color, but I had caste and class privileged as a Brahmin middle-class woman who had access to education and cultural capital that enabled my immigration and the career trajectory I had. I was a cis straight woman with two daughters, and a class, caste, gender, and sexual identity offered me white adjacency in so many ways. How then do I understand my feminism? Another personal experience that had me more recently rethinking my feminism was when my older daughter came out as queer. Our daughters were raised in an inclusive family and were surrounded by my queer friends from Seattle University. So they grew up in a very non-heteronormative world. However, my daughter's engagement and subsequent marriage to a Japanese American trans woman had us as a family wrestling with our extended family in India when the couple came out to them. We encountered curiosity, confusion, loving support, and a whole different understanding of working across several languages. I realized all my terminology to explain gender sexuality was in English. I did not know how to do this in Tamil and to talk to my 90-year-old aunt about my daughter, right? That was a crash course in language translation, different understandings of gender, sexuality, etc., and to cross generational boundaries as well. Yet again, my positionality, my understanding of intersectionality, and my sense of community shifted. Now that I've explored my positionality as a feminist and my journey through stories, I want to reflect a little bit on the current political moment. There's a reason I emphasized a little bit of my upbringing. So the recent elections with Kamala Harris as a presidential candidate opened some extraordinarily interesting questions for me. Harris's mother, Shyamala Gopalan, came from a very similar background to mine, Tamil Brahmin, middle class with caste and class privilege. She was a generation before me, a single graduate student in the United States. Her experience was radical. Women of her generation, basically folks my mother's age, barely completed high school in our community, and here she was arriving in the late 1950s to the United States to study and to get a PhD and to go on to a distinguished career as a scientist. Her marriage to a Black man was even more radical given the colorism and anti-Black racism in the Indian community, not just here, but back in India as well. His Jamaican heritage and her Indian one, I realize, are very closely intertwined because of the shared experience of British colonialism. When she became a single mother, she chose to raise her daughters in the Black community because she knew that in the US, they would be seen as Black. And while they were connected to their Indian heritage, she wanted them to find community in the country of their birth. She also probably realized that in a conservative Hindu Brahmin community with its deep-seated colorism and racism, her biracial daughters would have a hard time finding belonging. So listening to the public discourse in the media in the election campaign, I realized that the complexities of Harris's biracial identity were lost on the general American public. Her racial identity was reduced to a binary. She was either South Asian or she was Black. She couldn't be both because the South Asians claimed her as their own and Black folks claimed her as their own. There was not a conversation about what it means to be both. Her biracial identity was also fodder for the MAGA people and their unfettered racism. The election results have underscored the deep racism and sexism in American life and a phenomenal absence of nuance in any conversation about race. The recent Twitter battles, in the last 2 weeks, between the MAGA faction led by Laura Loomer and Steve Bannon on one side, and the tech billionaires Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy on the other. They've been battling about H-1B visas and high-tech immigrants and so forth, exposed a discourse of anti-Indian racism versus a model minority perception. All of the Musks and the Ramaswamis want high-tech workers. The MAGA faction is anti any kind of immigrant, right? As you know this. What this debate exposed to me is a discourse of anti-Indian racism and a model minority perception, all of which is filtered through the experience of the Indian male tech bro, highly educated migrants. What is missing in this discussion is the place of working class South Asians, of those who are not high-tech folks, and any understanding of the intersections of race and LGBTQI identities. To me, the election and its aftermath are reminders that so much more nuance and historical understanding are necessary in American public discourse. As a feminist educator, I see so much work that needs to be done. For me, teaching with an intersectional feminist lens to engage my students in these complex debates is both activism and resistance. In telling you these stories, I want to underscore the following. One, feminism is always in the plural. There never was nor is a singular feminist narrative. Two, your journey as a feminist does not have an end point. The journey itself is the story. Three, intersectionality looks different for different people and is often paradoxical. There are different power vectors in many aspects of your life and influence your identity as well as your activism because your place within these vectors of power are never fixed. Four, struggle and joy go hand in hand in this feminist journey. Often we emphasize the struggle, but one should always look for joy. Even these rather difficult times that are ahead of us, and God knows what's coming down the pike. We live in an era of genocide, fascism, climate catastrophe, but there's always moments of joy. And without joy, there can be no resilience nor resistance. Thank you.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you, Nalini. Kari, Lerum.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Gabriella, for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure to be back. I've taught here 25 years ago, and it feels like it's just sort of zooming back into history here, but it's the contemporary. So thank you for being here. Feminism for me is a tool, an ideology, an inspiration, a spiritual mandate. It is embedded in some institutions while being rooted out of others. But it is always in community and conversations like this one. For me, feminism starts with a moral and spiritual stance. Your body should not be the basis of being sorted into a social hierarchy, whether it's leader, follower, worthy, unworthy. This begins with the sex category you're born into, such as your genitals, your hormones, and your chromosomes. But this principle can also be applied to all embodied markers, such as skin color, height, weight, disability, age, perceived attractiveness, and so on. We can also extend this to how people adorn their bodies, which is how we signal to others our social affiliations, like our gender, our ethnicity, our religion, and so on. Finally, feminism is not just a personal belief about not judging people based on what their bodies look like. It's about changing culture and institutions to align those principles with how people are treated here on Earth. I started identifying as a feminist at age 20 while taking a feminist linguistics class in Australia. It was there that I learned how everyday language can serve to reinforce male dominance and reinforce women's oppression. I hold that moment now within an archive of moments which mark my journey through feminism, each event contoured by the place, people, and concerns of that time. It was during that time that I began glimpsing my own gender and sexual liberation. Feminist consciousness saturated every part of me, from the way that I spoke, like switching out humankind from mankind, to the way I understood my appearance, always both political and personal, to pursuing relationships across socially forbidden lines of sex, gender, race, religion, and class. All of those changes in words, appearance, and behavior brought me extremes of freedom and misery. My own self-actualization, especially when it came to my partner choices, came with the price of being seen as a moral pariah for many. Although this was an incredibly painful time for me, my queer pariah status fueled my desire for understanding sexual politics of who's deemed worthy and who's deemed unworthy. Feminist writings by lesbians, sex workers, and women of color, scholars like Adrienne Rich, Audre Lorde, Gail Ribben, Bell Hooks, many of whom are quoted here, brought me courage during those years. And the more that I learned, the more I began to realize that focusing on my own concerns for gender and sexual liberation were just a start. It was actually limiting my feminist analysis. Yes, my personal was political, but the feminist political contains so much more than just my personal circle of places, people, desires, and concerns. In other words, feminist inspiration varies according to what we are liberating ourselves from. Part of this lesson I realized in conversation with other white, cis, middle-class feminists like me, who were uncomfortable with me centering the voices of unapologetic sex workers in my analysis. At that time, in the 90s, feminist conversations were dominated by feminist thinkers who were white, cis, middle-class, and often straight. Their own positionalities and concerns were often focused on things like work-family balance, equal pay, reproductive choice, all very important issues. This was also during the time of what we call the feminist sex wars, where the meaning of sexuality, what we do with our bodies sexually and with whom, became a feminist battle line. As a young queer woman, I was drawn more to the narratives of gender and sexual outsiders, people who were gay and lesbian, trans people, people who had made a living selling sex, than I did with white feminists in straight marriages with straight jobs. My deepest lessons about feminism have come, however, from sex workers, people who are disproportionately of color, poor, trans, immigrant, and disabled, as well as the academic frameworks from Black and multiracial feminists and anti-carceral feminists. Gradually, I began to bring from margin to center, citing Bell Hooks, concerns not just about my partner choices, but about liberation from violence, whether that be from police or from interpersonal partners, and to have access to shelter, healthy food, clean air, and water, things that I didn't have to worry about, but I know that many people do worry about. In other words, feminism is about changing institutions to align our principles with how people are treated here on Earth. Queer Chicana feminist Gloria Anzaldúa has a term that's, I think, captures this for me well: spiritual activism. For Anzaldúa, this involved connecting our individual consciousness changes, seeing the connections between all beings, in her case, to bringing this consciousness, this interconnected consciousness, to our feminist practices and policies. There are an infinite number of ways to practice feminist spiritual activism. I think we're in a moment now where we're kind of in a reckoning of how can we best practice our best selves and our best feminist selves. It can be overwhelming, but it can also be quite simple. For me, I start to ask myself, what tools do I have in this time in my disposal? Is it time, money, connections, skills? And secondly, what do I need to liberate myself from right now? And it always is, a liberation from racist paradigms, liberation from ableist paradigms. And how can that personal liberation help me better use the tools that I have for collective liberation? These concerns over the course of our lives are contoured by who we are, who we're with, and what we're currently liberating ourselves from. But I think we need to see the long game here. We have many seasons of feminist activism, if we're fortunate. And so I'm just going to leave you with the two questions. What tools do you have right now? What do you need to liberate yourself from? And how can you use that liberation to spread your tools for collective liberation? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lerum. Wonderful and provocative, as usual. Hye-Kyung, it's your turn. Dr. Hye-Kyung Kang.
Good evening. Thanks for being here and thank you for including me. It's an honor and it's just been educational just to listening to you. So Gabriella asked us to talk about how we came into feminism. And I learned about feminism by people who would not have proclaimed to be a feminist, but acted in a feminist way. My great-grandparents, this was 1910s, long time ago, decided that to educate their daughter, my grandmother, just like they did their son. This was when most Koreans were not educated beyond grade school, maybe middle school. Only a fraction of Korean men received college education, and when a tiny portion of Korean women went to college. My great-grandparents decided to send their daughter to study abroad in Japan alongside their son. This was practically unheard of because men were very much prioritized in the family because men carried on family name and women didn't. But my great-grandparents decided that they wanted their daughter to have an equal opportunity for education. So they're like the OG of gender equity well before their time. My grandmother, the person they sent to Japan for education, decided that she will marry for love instead of an arranged marriage. Arranged marriage, as you well know, is really about keeping the status quo, both economically and socially. She met my grandfather while she was studying in Japan, and she was one of what they were called Korean new women who decided they will have a choice in their lives. And these new women became a huge force in Korean liberation movement against Japanese colonial system. Girls, really, 15, 16-year-old college students, they became a major force in liberation movement, organizing. Some of them were murdered, some of them were jailed. Fortunately, my grandmother wasn't. And after she was married, she became very active in women's education in Korea, even after she got married, which was also unheard of. My mother is another person. She decided to put herself through college while working 2 jobs as a young woman. This was after my grandfather died and my grandmother's family lost everything in Korean War, including many, many people in their lives. So as an 18-year-old, she decided to put herself through college, and she graduated from the prestigious Seoul National University. Unfortunately, she married my father, who was very abusive, but she was a survivor. She was finally able to get a divorce from my father in her 40s, which was the most courageous and arduous thing she did. The life in the US was tougher than anyone could have imagined, but she went back to work, back to school to get her doctorate in her late 50s and became an ordained Christian minister. This involved a horrible fight with the Korean American church because they believed that as a woman and a divorced woman, she should not become an ordained minister. This costed her job. She was fired from her job as a dean of students at a Korean seminary. She has suffered a lot of persecution, but she went on because she believed that she has the same right as men, and she knew her moral stance was correct. And she ended up working with other women, Korean women, to become ministers and have a different ministry that was very radical in reinterpreting women's roles in Bible and in church. None of these folks would have said they were feminists. That was not their language. But their actions were feminist. So because of this, feminism to me is not what you proclaim, but what you do. To me, feminist is action. Now, I want to point out that none of these people are perfect. My grandmother, after she became a widow and lost everything during the war, was resistant to my mom's insistence to get a higher education. She wanted my mother to get a job as a teacher. They used to be able to get a job after high school to support the family. My mother also often prioritized my brother over myself or my sister because she believed that having a successful older brother was important to me and my sister because we live in a patriarchal society. So I do not expect feminists to be perfect. I understand that we live in a deeply patriarchal and sexist and racist world. And we must have a bigger tent if we want all of us to work toward taking down patriarchy and all other oppressive systems. Insisting on purity politics is a toxin to our movement. You also asked how I came into it, other than my feminist acting family. I was very fortunate in that my first introduction to feminism was that of intersectional feminism. I was taking classes in gender studies, Asian American studies, and so on. I was involved in activist community, and the kind of feminism that made sense to me as a young immigrant Asian American woman was what the Third World Women's Alliance have talked about as a triple jeopardy, right? Racism, sexism, imperialism, which includes global capitalistic dominance. Some of my feminist heroes are there: Bell Hooks, Angela Davis, Gloria Anzaldúa. And it made sense to me because that's what my community did. I was very, very clear that from working with my activist elders in my community and my colleagues, that feminism is political. It is about activism. So one of the things that folks don't always know is that the Third World Women's Alliance was really active in Seattle. So there's a East Coast and West Coast, and the Bay Area had a chapter, and Seattle had a chapter. And the Seattle chapter was very active with Asian American women as well as Black and Latina women who connected their cause with what was going on globally, like anti-Marcos movement in the Philippines and anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. So to me, when I think about feminism, because of what I've been hearing, heard, seeing, it is really about alliances. It is about making sure that everybody's liberated. It's not just my cause, my family, my ethnic group. It is, how do we liberate everyone? How do we live in a world that we can all be liberated? To me, that was the kind of feminist that made sense to me. And a lot of what I've learned about feminism is through just being with my colleagues, my friends, my sisters who are multiracial, straight and queer. We learned how to act as a feminist really from our discussions, dialogues, working together, really from tracing the back, the curves of our backs and that to me comes back to what you asked about politics, feminism now. I think more than ever, we need to look to the Third World Women's Alliance and their recognition effort to emphasize intersectionality. Intersectionality as in intersectionality of struggles, not individual analysis. I think this is so much more important now because there has been so much false binary narratives about race versus gender, race versus class, gender versus race, and so on. And binary discourse is a weapon of coloniality. This is how coloniality gets maintained, by having these binary discourses, and it has always been. So to me, returning to roots, to intersectional feminism seems particularly cogent at this political time. I also think that it is important. I mean, you talked about all the Americas, right? And Nalini, you talked about South Asia. We look at global feminist movements and all ways in which people act their feminism. I have been very keen to follow what was happening in South Korea in the last few months. You probably know what happened in South Korea. The President Yoon Suk-yeol, who was famously misogynist, I would say, and really elected on the platform of misogyny, was impeached. And that took a lot of people's movement. And I watched as young women in their 20s, and they were impacted gravely by President Yoon Suk-yeol and his taking down of gender equity services and ministry, were all out and organizing, protesting, and most importantly, they brought joy to the protest. They brought joy to activism, and they brought intergenerational unity. So I think that's where I look to. I look back at our heroes in Third World Women's Alliance, intersectional racism, and I look to all the organizing that is going on in people of color communities, queer communities, and also globally. So I am full of hope, and I think we can share the joy of activism and feminism in those dark days.
Thank you so much. And our artivista, Deycha Robinson, is with us now, and she's gonna put some punctuation on everything we've said. Yes?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Let me just flip to my page and get ready. So my name is Deycha. My last name is Robinson. One of the first stories that I was told as a young person growing up was my fierce advocacy for my last name to not be Robinson because my parents were never married. My mom tells me that I just couldn't understand it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. It didn't make sense why my name was my father's last name and they weren't married and they weren't together. And he wasn't a person that I called guardian in my home. We didn't call that feminism, and I didn't really know why, but it just didn't make sense to me. I wanted to reflect my mother. I wanted to reflect the other women in my life who had nurtured my creativity, nurtured my capacity as a truth teller. A couple years later, after I learned my last name, I'm learning myself, my body, grooming myself. I'm learning what different articles of clothing are. I'm learning training bra, I'm learning underwear, I'm learning my socks and my shoes and all these things. And I had elder family members insist that I call my underwear panties And I didn't understand that either. They were underwear, I wore them on my bottom, they were under my clothes. That's what my boy cousins called them. That's what I wanted to call them. And I was fierce about it. Again, I talked a lot. I complained a lot about the things that were put on me that I didn't understand. And also no one could help me understand it. They just kept telling me it's what I had to do, it's what I needed to say, and that it was proper to be in public and say your panties, right? I didn't want to do that. I never did it. With the support of my mother, right, who nurtured always me telling the truth, advocating for my perspectives, my worldview, even though I didn't have that language growing up. So just to back up a little bit more, I am an only child, or I grew up an only child of an only child to two parents who lived a short lives battling drug addictions, and many other struggles through their years. And so that left me, me and my mother at 16 and birth respectively in the mid 90s to navigate like what it meant to grow up together. So while I was learning to eat and chew and walk, she was learning how to be in her body as a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 19-year-old without matriarchs in her family, without leadership. And so I believe her first gift to me was to nurture my spirit as a truth teller so that I can best navigate the world that, is very against my presence in my bodily autonomy as a Black, queer, neurodivergent, thin child, now adult. Right, so she left me with that, well, she didn't do that, she's still here, right? Love her. She left me with that then, and it took me through high school, just using that voice, right, complaining a lot, and speaking a lot, and emoting a lot, and going through a lot of adversity because people are telling me, talking about that, and we don't care. But I couldn't let go of the feeling that the legacy that I had been given was to speak clearly, consistently, honestly, in this power, even when I was scared or confused, didn't understand, as a need to navigate any situation that I'm into. And so that takes me through high school, and it takes me to college. I was at the University of Michigan in a little very near town called Carter. It feels like a snow globe in like cute ways, and then all of the weird, creepy ways that you think about things happening in snow globe. So both of those things right were happening for me. I come from a background of deeply impoverished families, right? Impoverished by resources, monetary resources, access, of things. And so I'm kind of say that it's one of the first times that people who are existing within intersectional identities that often experience so many layers of harm. And so I think now I'm moving into saying that I'm a feminist by way of Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality, because that's important that we understand that the power dynamics are always shifting depending on who is in the room beside you and what stories and truths that people bring to that. And we have to be comfortable with shifting that and understanding our spaces of privilege so that we can continue to make space for other people, even when it's a little bit scary, even when you think you may be losing. And to also find those people who are existing within intersectional identities that often experience so many layers of harm. And so I think now I'm moving into saying that I'm a feminist by way of Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality, because that's important that we understand that the power dynamics are always shifting depending on who is in the room beside you and what stories and truths that people bring to that. And we have to be comfortable with shifting that and understanding our spaces of privilege so that we can continue to make space for other people, even when it's a little bit scary, even when you think you may be losing access to something. It actually, in my opinion, is the best way forward, because then we'll be taking care of everybody and then we can all move forward together. And so of course there's like the macro all, but there's like the small all that's people in your neighborhood, at the coffee shop that you see all the time, your classmates, your roommates, whoever they may be, you can start to cultivate that now. And I guess I'm speaking more to the students because I would expect that more older adults, myself included, right, have a bit more of a start on this and maybe feel less awkward with bringing these things up and kind of being a disruptor, right? So I guess I'll leave you with continue to be compassionate disruptors and continue to rest.
Thank you so much, Deycha. A lot to think about. It's okay. So we have decided as a group to cut out our conversation and have conversations with you, which I agree. These are my great advisors, so if they think that's where we should go, that's where we should go. I did want to say that I hope that some of you up here or in the audience will speak more about resistance and future feminisms. I think that I often think that feminism is owned by Americans, because you go to anywhere in another country and any social class and you find feminist women. And so I want to just say that. I love your coined term, compassionate disruptors, Deycha. That's really beautiful. And now we will, I guess we have to, is there a microphone? Oh, perfect. So please step up and ask questions of all these women feminists from, we all have different perspectives, but we unite in community to respond to you. So please come up and ask us some questions. Yes. Yeah, it's easier. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, thank you so very much for all of your wonderful talk. And then just because I loved your question so much, which was what are our tools and what are our challenges? If it's possible to ask that question to the speakers, really appreciate it.
Oh. I'm often talking about tools, and I'm Gabriella. I'm often just very happy to have grown up in dire poverty and be living a middle class life. Right? We all hold on to the middle class no matter what it takes. Right? I love the middle class. But so it gives me some tools, and that's why it's so important to interact with different generations and people from different places, because we can acquire tools from them. So growing up in the working class, you know, if something happens to me, that's not the end of the world. Okay. And also I'm very fortunate to have had a mother that was a staunch feminist and defender of our women. Because that really gave me a model for being. And I tell my students, we have to look back into our ancestors sometimes, community leaders, and those are some of my tools. Go ahead.
I can start. One of my biggest tools for me is laughter, because it reminds me and my body that is not just pain, and that is not just suffering, and that is not just heavy. And I have so far found it to be the best motivator for me to do anything, is to bookend it with a little bit of laughter on the front and on the end. Maybe it's a somatic practice that I don't know that I've done, but I think that tool, and learning to leverage it in the appropriate ways, and then learning to kind of create these scripts with people that I trust that we can go into and know what we're looking for. So I think it's learning laughter in community with other people that you cultivate over time.
Okay, as an English professor, I would say that I look to writing, to music, to art, to bring me both solace and contemplation. I think that these are very important tools in trying to understand the world, other people's perspectives, all of that. And in terms of challenges, I think that the fascist government, not just here, but in India as well, they're working very hard to destroy the kind of communities we have built, where you can laugh, where you can enjoy art, where you can be with one another. So I think one of the challenges for us is to maintain the sort of solidarity and community that we all treasure, that big tent somebody spoke about that we have to be all part of.
Thank you for that question. I'll start with the liberation. As I mentioned earlier, I was, really intent on how to be liberated sexually. And I feel like I've kind of figured that out, and that's sort of an ongoing thing. And so I have moved over the years in terms of systems of oppression, other systems of oppression. So racism, ableism, any kind of ism that I'm enacting and just needing to bring to the fore, I think is inhibiting my ability to be the best that I can. And so I'm trying to liberate myself from systems of oppression in terms of my own consciousness. I also I've been increasingly trying to liberate myself from distractions, whether it be, sort of habitually drinking alcohol or habitually shopping or just sort of looking on internet, because those distractions are not helping me fulfill the acts of self-actualization of where I want to be going in terms of my own liberation and in terms of collective liberation. In terms of tools, those things do change over time. I look at my mother, who's 84 years old, and she has the tool of time, and she spends a lot of time with folks who are sick and dying, and I think that's a beautiful thing for her to be doing right now. And I see this as a feminist act. When I was younger, I also had more time and I spent a lot of time in the streets as an activist and doing things that weren't productive in terms of what would look good on my CV. And then I had a kid and then I got a job and I was really upset, like I can't be an activist anymore. So I turned my attention towards teaching and towards writing. And so I'm in that phase now, but I also very much am interested in cultivating tools of contemplation and spirituality and sharing that with other people at this point. Thanks.
So my tools are surprisingly social work tools. They're very interchangeable. First is critical reflection about where I'm staying in my body, in my mind, in my spirit. Where am I coming from? What does that mean? What is my perspective? Where did that come from? How did I interact in a way that I can look into different societal influences? How does that come up? How does that show up in my actions, my thinking, my interactions? The second is curiosity. We talk about in social work, non-judgmental curiosity with cultural humility. Really approaching, and I think that's important when you're having conversation or interaction, really approaching without my agenda, with actual curiosity about that person's and that person's humanity, the human dignity part of it. And the third is action. Social work has a work in the name, so we have to do action. And that action to me is, what can I do immediately to stand with this person? And to me, when it comes down to be that is one gift. I always tell my social work students, our gift is being here and now with that person at sometimes most traumatic moments, sometimes most marginalizing times, sometimes most hopeless times. Being there here and now and giving myself and my time and my full attention and standing with that person. Those are surprisingly social work and surprisingly my feminist tools. Thank you for asking the question.
So in my class, we've been talking about paradigm shifts and creating your own paradigm and formulating a paradigm that you are content with. And I was also discussing with my students how I lost my first job. My first job as a graduate student was so we need to see who's manipulating us. What paradigm shift, what paradigm are we being absorbed into? So I was hired to dub films about Latin American activist women. They were informational, like El Alvarado in Honduras. And I lost my job because I refused to use, I don't know how to, una voz lastimera, like these people were victims. I refused to victimize them. And they wanted me to say, well, either eat an egg or get salt for it, right? It's not what I was saying, it's how they wanted me to say it. So I want to bring up that we need to perceive how society is trying to guide us like cattle into ways of seeing feminism and seeing women in other parts of the world. Are you ready for your questions? Here you are. Yes. Can you stand up, please, so everybody can, and loud, loud, loud. That's a good question. I'm not going to start this time. What's the note to this? Did you hear it? I need to think on this one.
It's related to art. I am a painter and I had the opportunity to have some artwork in a window storefront in the International District. And I painted a giant picture of a fat black butt with stretch marks on it. And it was in the window for 6 months. And to me, that felt very, very, very feminist. And it felt kind of defiant because it wasn't a part of the body that I felt like would necessarily be, I didn't portray it in a way that would be sexualized by the male gaze. I portrayed it in a much more authentic and nuanced way that I think reflects more people's bodies than the perceptions that we're led to have. So for me, that was the more fun one that came to mind recently, that didn't have to do with me suffering. It had to do with me having fun and being a disruptor and making people look at a big lumpy butt and thighs.
This is a tough one.
Yes.
But what jumps to me actually is, I think my most feminist actions have been actually as a parent, raising two girls, such that they didn't face the same burdens I did growing up, and that they can lead authentic lives and have the support and the conversations with their parents in ways that I don't think was possible when I was growing up. And so to me, if you ask me, I think that's, that I think is my biggest feminist contribution.
Shout out to parenting too. It's not an easy job, and definitely that's a big part of my feminist action. What I've always aspired to, when I was younger, I wanted to work for the United Nations. I've always been very kind of global, political kind of person. And so in my work and in my writing, I've always tried to make it relevant to policy. And a couple of times, I think that I've made a little teeny dent on policy, or at least policy discussions. One was at the level of the State Department, and it was related to a United Nations Human Rights Coalition Council statement around sex workers and LGBTQ people in the United States. But the thing that I'm most proud about is not the white paper that we wrote and the article that we wrote, but that we worked together, that I worked together with a coalition of people. And that is the thing that has maintained and sustained me, is that those connections with people across different sectors, people who identify as sex workers, people who identify as lawyers, who are lawyers or academics, and that kind of community is what I'm most proud of. And so I still aspire to changing policy, but I also am very jaded in the ability to do very much. And so I try to take comfort in the community building around that kind of effort.
I'm going to actually share two, if that's okay. One is, as a professor, that I insist that my students practice critical thinking and intersectional analysis. I insist that all the time. So my proud moments is when sometimes my graduates say, "Oh, I can never look at or think of anything without Professor Kang telling me critically, what do you think?" I always tell them to say, if somebody says X, Y, and Z is always true, to say, is it though? So my student says like, you know what? I find myself going, is it though? And the other one I teach is, how does power operate? So they say that whenever they say, oh, now I have your voice saying, how does power operate? I'm very proud. I feel like I've done my job. The other thing that I'm very proud and very similar to what you're saying, is that in, I believe, mid-90s, a group of us, Asian American women, got together and decided that we want to address and we want to put our women and family and their lives at the center of gender violence, anti-gender violence movement, because of a lot of, I mean, I'm not going to go into that, but a lot of things that were happening. So we ended up founding an organization that centers intersectionality, liberation, and community organizing, which was a very different model than a lot of gender violence organization. It was called API Women and Family Safe Center, which later merged with Chaya, and now is API Chaya. And they're still doing some amazing work. So I am proud of being in there with the community of women who decided, if we're going to do this, we're going to put ourselves in the center. If we're going to do this, we're going to put liberation of everyone in the center. So
There's so many things I'm proud of in my feminism. One of them is writing about telling it all. It's advised not to put out that presumed incompetent. I think Kari is the only one here, part of that book. And there's a second volume. So there's one volume that was reissued. I get thank you notes. I get lawyers calling me. They're using the book, right, to get people tenure. And I think that's what I'm most proud of. I'm also most proud of saying things that were very painful to say in the interest of other people. Like when my son ran away at 13, never in my life did I ever imagine to have a son that would run away from me. And when he ran away, I wrote a collection because I found out that everybody I talked to knew someone who had parents of a child who had run away. But it was almost like abortion. You know, that nobody will tell you that they had an abortion. They won't. And that's what running away was, the equivalent. People didn't talk about it. So in the interest of putting it on the table and trying to understand why we have this epidemic in the United States, because it's really not something that's happening as much in other countries. And that was very painful because I used to get all kinds of questions of things I didn't want to talk about. But I felt that as a feminist, I should. Other questions? We have time for a couple other questions. Yes, Nova.
Make sure there's no student questions first. Any other students? Okay, then I will jump in.
That is feminism. Looking out for our students.
Amongst many other things. All of your comments today were just so inspiring. And one of the through lines that I heard in many of the comments was this emotional vocabulary. There was not often articulated, but kind of this sense of frustration at certain patriarchal norms, not being able to say panty, not being able to engage in the thread ceremonies, all of these types of things. There's also language of joy. And hope. And I'm just wondering if, as a way of maybe closing this conversation today, you might be able to talk about what feminism feels like to you. When you think about feminism, what does it feel like? And I think if we talk about it and how it feels, we might push against some of these external stereotypes that feminism is a space that is very strict and not a liberatory space because of the ways in which certain emotions are sometimes policed in some forms of feminism. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think about how feminism feels. Thanks.
I think feminism feels like community. And in a world where we are increasingly isolated, and as an immigrant, there's a lot of times, I felt I belong, I don't. What's my place here? Came here in the late 80s. So walking into classrooms and being the only brown female in a predominantly white Midwestern graduate classroom with all these theory bros spouting jargon. It was in the feminist classes that I took that I was like, I can breathe here now. Because these are people who feel what I feel. Someone might have grown up in South Texas and not in Southern India, but there's such a commonality of experience, of exclusion, of fighting, of pushing back. And so community, that I'm sitting on stage with people and, Gabriella mentioned presumed competent. When I go to a conference and I say I'm from Seattle University, someone invariably says, do you know Gabriella? I go, absolutely presumed incompetent, absolutely. She's one of my dearest friends and a very respected colleague. And that ability to say that we come from a community, I think that to me is what feminism is about.
Okay, I guess I'm still thinking about it. The first words that come to me are pleasure and joy, and I think that just connects to my entry to feminism at age 20. It was very joyful and very pleasurable, and it was a personally liberatory time. And, of course, there have been lots of fights within feminism and against feminism, but I always feel at the center of it that it is a very joyful, pleasurable place.
For me, it's family. Family and poetry. I'm a poet. But very much family. When people ask me, didn't you want to have daughters? Because I have 2 sons. I said, I don't need daughters. I have my feminist friends. My friends, all of them are invariably feminist, but so it is a family. And anywhere I go, I can find people across the room that I know have similar values to me. And I really love that question, Nova. Thank you for bringing that to us.
I'm trying to find, I think you wanted to, I think, what does it feel like? So many feels, but I think there is an intersection of vulnerability and strength, or vulnerability as strength, centering vulnerability, marginality as strength.
As I continue on my own journey, my own interpersonal journey, feminism, it feels more so like an opportunity to me at this stage of my life and in holding my identity, because there are lots of ways that ideology is embodied that still can manifest to be like unsafe spaces for me personally. And so it feels like an opportunity to continue forward in being the most compassionate and intersectionally minded person. And I really like the comment about vulnerability, because I think that that'll be the most transformative tool for me in continuing to explore the past, the present, and the future of feminisms, to be vulnerable and to know that you can create these spaces with people and you can learn and grow together, even if you're coming at it from a space of like hurt. So I think opportunity feels good to me.
We do have time for one last question. If anybody has something pressing, something they want to add, yes. Mm. Mm. Forgiveness in feminism. For me personally, it's essential. It's essential. But I know other people have other
It's a
answers.
struggle. I still hold grudges against certain people and places. And I can be forgiving in certain other situations. So it's a work in progress.
I agree with like the work in progress feel. I do think it's essential because I don't feel personally in my body that the grudges that I do hold have been generative, like for me, meaning that I don't think that they've bred much more than like ferociousness, which I adore, and also is not always the most productive for me as a living, breathing, like gentle being. And so I think that forgiveness is important, and I think that it's critical, and then we should approach it like kind of slowly but diligently, right? So I try to take little bites consistently and not throw myself in, because then I'll get a little afraid, I'll get a little shocked, get a little scared, because I'm human and there's fear. So yeah, it's essential. You take a little bit at a time, right? You kind of scale up. You got to get your system familiar first, and then you dive into it.
I would like to actually hear more about why it's essential for you, Gabriella. Forgiveness.
Forgiveness. I didn't forgive. I couldn't go on to write another book. It's actually selfish. It's about me, right? Yeah, because I need to feel good, and if I don't forgive, I can't feel good. But that's my process. It's like I've got. God damn it! Excuse me. I have to forgive this person, even though they were horrible with me. And I talk myself into it, and it's usually for the best. Then I can go and do other things for other people.
I like how you center yourself. That's good. No, I really think sometimes, I think really it's about liberation, isn't it? Forgiveness. And I find that I think this is a place I think we could be completely selfish. Forgiveness to be liberated. And most importantly, at least for me, the most liberating thing is to forgive myself for every little thing that I hold on to because of whatever that perfectionism, whatever that colonial message that I have. I have recently decided that perfectionism is the result of, geez, I had a really good thing the other day and I can't remember now. But honestly, I think perfectionism is me looking at myself from colonial gaze. So in that regard, forgiveness is liberation for me.
And I think when I think about the question of forgiveness and the place of forgiveness within feminism, my initial reaction was this like kind of nervous chuckle, because I'm like, oh yeah, I struggle with that one. And I think just to expand more on that, the areas that I've struggled with around forgiveness has been a result of my not having formed my own concept of what the forgiveness looked like and how to embody it. And so I think that that's been a really pivotal kind of awakening for me, is to accept that I can create what the forgiveness looks like for me, and I can still hold on to like my power in a productive and positive way, and also kind of let go in a sense. So definitely like creating what forgiveness looks like to you. Otherwise, I do think that it leaves us open to accepting the ways that have been put on us by oppressive systems of like what forgiveness looks like, and a lot of times that looks like allowing people to continue to harm or allowing things to continue to harm. So they're creating their own definition I feel it's super important to be having a positive forgiveness.
Great.
I was just thinking about forgiveness, self-forgiveness. I mean, we can't, forgiveness is a relationship, right? You can't, I feel like when I forgive, it's in relationship with somebody else. And it involves discussion and accountability, but ultimately you can't, the other person can't receive your forgiveness. Like you can forgive them in your heart, but that's their job, right? The only one you can receive is you. You can, forgiving yourself, and then trying to understand yourself and trying to understand other people. But that's always in conversation. It's not like sort of I forgive, Hitler kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like there's big atrocities that I don't forgive, but I would be interested in having a conversation with someone who used to be a Nazi and having a conversation with them and having understanding and having accountability. So it's a live process. And I think in that sense, it's a very feminist process.
Incredible feminist writer, Patrice Hye-Kyung, who I'm bringing to Seattle next year. She has a wonderful book for teenagers. And it's not really for teenagers, but it's about revenge and forgiveness. That's what it's called, Revenge and Forgiveness. And it's poems. And that book, I was just thinking right now, I never thought about it before, helped me process that. I want to thank everybody. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you all for being here, for great questions. Gabriella, thank you, Sola, for coordinating all of this.
Thank you so much for being here. We'll bring you more of this in the future. Thank you.